Today, we are able to find faster and better pathways, experimentally valid within 15 minutes using artificial intelligence. So our panelists are here to discuss what big dreams exist for the digital era and how science and business processes are being reshaped and reinvented as a consequence. So I hope you're excited. So I'm gonna introduce Jarrell. He is going to moderate our discussion for the night. Jarrell Mason, he is an instrumentation reliability engineer at Phillips 66, and I'll hand that over to him.
Let's give it up for Anthony one more time. How's everyone doing tonight? I'm gonna need that again. One more time. Let's try it one more time. How is everyone doing tonight? All right, there it is. So, like Anthony said, welcome. Everyone, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be the moderator. Cool. My background is electrical engineering, and being around chemistry has actually, I think, makes me smarter, which is actually cool. So, to get into it, the topic for this evening, the theme is digital innovation, right? And we have a wealth of knowledge here on this panelist, very much diverse background, a lot of plethora of knowledge here in the building tonight. So to get right into it, I'm gonna start off with the first question. But before I get into that, if you have any questions throughout the discussion, please save them for later. We have a Q&A, which will roughly go about, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, roughly. So if you have any questions, write them down, and feel free to shoot them out. Okay? Cool. Awesome. So I would like to start off with the first question, and I'm going to propose it to my good pal, Jason. You know, if he Phillips 66, you have to catch it. Okay. All right.
The inside connection.
So, Jason, my question to you is, how has machine learning changed during your career at Phillips 66, and how do you see that change impacting careers in the near future?
Thank you, Jarrell. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, good. So I started Phillips 66 about 21 years ago. So I was in research and development. I came out of graduate school. My background, my undergraduate degree is in aerospace engineering. I've got a PhD in computational physical chemistry. And so coming into R&D, there was a small computational physical chemistry group within Phillips 66, which basically disbanded over time. But I moved into doing analytical chemistry. And the interesting thing is I was basically doing machine learning 20 years ago before they called it machine learning. So we were doing principal components analysis, partial least squares, regression, and factor-based analysis, looking at physical properties of polymers and relating it to nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And so you couldn't do much with it back then, and because your computer systems were so small, the data storage was so small, it took a long time to run even these relatively simple regression analysis. So I did that for about a year, and then I transitioned over to doing catalyst development work, process scale up, that sort of thing in R&D. Went and moved into refining, and I was in our refining organization for about 10 years. So have worked at 3 different refineries, was process engineer, was managed operations at one of our smaller refineries, and then from there transitioned into our commercial organization. So I managed the market analysis group for our trading organization. So we had folks in Singapore, London, and Houston developing trade strategies around commodities. And then about 2 years ago, when Phillips 66 decided to build a data science organization, they were going around and shopping for people within the company that had a passion and an interest in data science and machine learning and AI, but had the technical and computational background in order to do this. And so we started off with a small team of 5 of us that were, just slowly developing projects. But it was interesting. It was even then, 2 years ago, it was difficult to move data around, because all of our systems were so antiquated. Our data is stored in just all of these different places. We have 12 refineries. Each one has its own historian, so they each have their own independent process data. But all of the commercial data has stored in 4 or 5 different systems. The key things that metrics that we saw, there are 170,000 access databases that were on our shared drives. There are 20 million spreadsheets. And there's only 15,000 employees, so I don't know how everybody's got 1,000 spreadsheets that they use, but I'm pretty sure they don't. But it's just it speaks to kind of the organization of the systems and of the data and kind of the state of the data. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years now is aggregating all of that data into a data warehouse, into the cloud. We're now doing calculations on virtual machines in the cloud rather than trying to do calculations on a computer that's sitting at your desk or an on-prem server. And it's amazing the acceleration and the computational power that you can get. So I remember one of my first things I was doing a project where I was actually doing principal components analysis again 20 years later, and I ended up with a matrix that was 4.5 million rows by about 300, or 4.5 million columns by 300 rows, and I was doing a singular value decomposition on it, and I was like, I wonder how long this is gonna take on this VM. So I just kind of hit the button and walked away to go get a snack because I'm like, I don't know how long. It took 3.5 minutes. It's I was like, oh, this is great, and it wasn't even on a GPU accelerated machine. It was on a CPU accelerated machine, and now we have the ability to scale up, scale down VMs in the cloud. At any point in time when I'm doing research, and I say, okay, I want one GPU accelerated machine, I just click on the button, click deploy, and it's there. If I want one with 100 GPUs, I can just scale right up to that. You can scale up and scale down basically on demand. So computing power has increased dramatically. I've got 4 kids, and my 13-year-old hadn't seen all the Marvel movies. So we were just over this last break, we were going through and watching some of the movies, and we watched one of the first Avengers movies. And it was interesting. I didn't catch this in the first time I saw it, but they were sitting on that hovering aircraft carrier, and they were talking about the computational intensive capability of the computer that was on the aircraft carrier. And they said it does 600 teraflops. So 600 floating point operations per second. That's what they could imagine in, I think it was 2011, 13, something like that. Kind of the most powerful computer you could possibly think of. Well, supercomputers today do like 60 petaflops. So they're over 100 times faster what somebody could even imagine that they could do and make a movie. It wasn't even something that actually existed at the time. So it's amazing the acceleration of computing power, the acceleration of data availability, and the things that you can do. We've got people here from a number of different companies, but you think about Google and the natural language processing work they do. You think about they're starting to get sentiment analysis and inference on people's behaviors. You're starting to do natural language processing on millions and millions of records, and starting to see sentiment analysis in like neural nets, where you can flip one little hyperparameter on a neuron on a neural net, and all of a sudden the sentiment of the review goes from positive to negative. So they're able to basically determine kind of that one little factor that leads to the sentiment analysis in the review, and use that to use natural language generation to generate either positive or negative reviews. So I think it'll be pretty amazing what we can do in the future, doing reinforcement learning to improve decision making, use natural language processing to mine for concepts and ideas. And I think it's an exciting time for people that have the technical know-how and the business understanding to really marry those two things together.
Awesome. Wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Wealth of knowledge.
He's not biased at all, right? Yeah.
I'm not influenced, not at all. But to take that, all that computing and all the cloud and all that stuff you mentioned, when we talk about disruption, right? We hear the term disruption. So Amir, I think of you.
Super disruptive, dude.
So with disruption, we talked about like job placements, computing technologies, and the word is being applied to every little product or service that comes to market, and every new company that emerges, right? So given what Jason mentioned, Amir, you work at Google. So is the cloud truly disruptive? What's your thoughts? What you think?
Can you guys hear me okay? All right, awesome. Thanks for coming out tonight. So is the cloud truly disruptive? Well, in and of itself, sort of. The cloud, I see it as more of a catalyst or a change agent for disruption, right? So you hear about all these disruptive companies that were born in the cloud all the time, like the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Netflixes, that really, like, in their inception didn't set out to disrupt the industry that they were in, the giants or the incumbents that already kind of held the ground there. But they ended up doing just that. So to give you a little bit of perspective, right, a lot of these capabilities that are in the cloud, and to pivot off of Jason's point, right? These are capabilities that they've been investing in for decades, right? Investing millions of dollars, throwing tons of resources at infrastructure and super talented people to generate some of these capabilities, right? What does the cloud do for them? Well, really, it more or less augments their capability. It gives them the scale to do these computations in hours instead of weeks. It gives them access to, Google's infrastructure that serves 2 billion users on 8 different apps to do their machine learning and their big data computations and analysis, right? One example that comes to mind, some of you may have heard of Schlumberger, world's biggest oil services company, right? They built an energy and production cognitive platform on Google Cloud. Basically, what they do is they look at the subterranean, they do subterranean like geographic analysis, right? Generating tens of hundreds of terabytes of data a day, and then they need to feed this to their neural networks to process this data and kind of figure out where to drill for oil, right? Previously, they were running these computations on premise. It was taking them weeks. They got a 36x improvement when they built this on the cloud because they had that scale. They're able to do it in hours instead of weeks, right? But where the cloud's really, really disruptive is when you look at like the smaller players or the startups that are trying to get into these industries that are traditionally held down by the enterprise, right? Now those capabilities of high performance computing, AI, machine learning, big data services are available to all these small players that previously didn't have access to this. They had to invest millions and millions of dollars, and so the enterprises kind of held that space, right? Now we can have these startups coming in and they have access to these capabilities. It's affordable for them. And basically any entrepreneur with a good idea can now disrupt the enterprises that hold that space. So that's how I think the cloud's disruptive.
So it's disruptive and it's not disruptive, but it's
the catalyzer for disruption.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Sweet. So we have a good conversation going here about data, right? So Shane, focusing on this idea of data, you heard your friend Amir here from Google. He has all the data. He has all of it, right? so my question to you is, given all that data, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna segue just a little bit. I think of data like it's almost like crude oil. Like you get it out the ground, it's not useful. You can't do anything with data, right? But it's what you do with the data, right? So crude oil is like you can't put it in your car, you can't do anything with it, but you can refine it, you can make it to chemicals. It's super valuable. Data is super valuable, but it's what you do with it. So I'm curious to know, what are the most noteworthy data challenges facing development organizations in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, so thanks. So if I think about the pharmaceutical industry and some of the pressures that it's been experiencing, while the list is long, I think two of the more noteworthy challenges that as an industry we're kind of trying to grapple with on a pretty routine basis is the concept that it's getting a lot harder to identify medicines, to find druggable targets, to identify drug candidates that can actually meaningfully provide therapeutic benefit. And then the other end of the spectrum, and one of the things that I guess that drives is a more heavy emphasis on competitive advantage and being driven by speed to market, right? So the ability to actually innovate really quickly in the drug development space becomes a differentiator as a business. And I think at the other end of the spectrum, if I think about regulatory expectations, one of the things that's changed over the last 5-10 years in a regulated industry is the expectation about the level of information that's communicated when we actually go to file a medication or a drug, right? So if you think about, we're really kind of shortening or abbreviating the development life cycle, but at the same time, we're ever increasing the amount of data that's necessary to justify the decisions that we make when we put a medicine out to market. And I think if I think about what that means to us as data scientists or scientists that are interested in kind of data, I think that really drives a need to invest in tools and technologies that streamline the way in which we collect data, right? So there's a lot of discussion in the chemistry space about machine learning and how it potentially could be used, for example, for synthetic pathway development. I think one of the things that as an organization we've realized, the face of chemistry, especially in a lab scale and a development organization, hasn't really looked that different for the last 100 years. A round bottom flask has been the reactor of choice for most chemists for a very long time. And the way in which you kind of collect information hasn't really changed, right? So a lot of it is on a paper notebook. So we're doing a lot at Merck to think about how do we actually manage the data that we collect, but also, in part, the group that I lead is really focused on kind of changing the way we think about data capture, right? So we're really interested in kind of data intensity. How do you actually streamline the methodologies that can be used to acquire data and to actually make business impacting decisions from that data. So we're really essentially interested in developing the methodologies that are necessary to change the way which we execute experimentation, so improving the information density in a single experiment. We're trying to look at high throughput tools to change the way in which we screen large libraries of chemical transformations. We're trying to think about how do we actually take the experimental evidence that we have in a given set of experiments and dictate what the next set of experiments should be, with ultimately an eye towards how do you use kind of machine learning and how do you use the capabilities that exist in the cloud to really advance the pace at which we can actually do drug discovery, drug development, and drug deployment.
Awesome. So now, let's focus in on the idea of, you mentioned methodology, and I'm gonna take it over to Bob here, my buddy. So from that note, I'm curious to know, I think we're all curious to know, right? If you could possibly add a layer to the conversation, right, revolving around the scientific method as to how we go about using it, because it has been successful over 300 years, right? So how will digital technologies or approaches affect or impact a proven and well-established process?
So you didn't choose this because you think I'm as old as the scientific method, I hope.
You look younger than me.
First of all, by the way, it's thrilling to be here. This is a great forum. I've had some great conversations with students already, really enjoying it. So I do think about the scientific method. As you pointed out, it's ancient, and if we think about it, right, so we make observations, we form hypotheses. From those hypotheses, we have to come up with some experimental method to test those hypotheses. We get the data, we analyze it, we see whether our hypothesis was correct, and it starts over and over and over again. That is not going to change, right? That is a tried and true method, and it's been good for a long time, and it's going to continue to be good. So we're not really reinventing that. What's becoming true, though, as my colleagues have mentioned, it's very digital, right? So we will get the observational data, through all the techniques that we've talked about. Our hypotheses, when I started, when you formed a hypothesis, you had an eye to the experiment that you were stuck doing. So you were constrained in some ways by the experiment. Now the first experiments are going to be done in silico. That's where the first experiments are going to be done. And then now we can make our experiments much, much broader. We don't have to be constrained by the physical environment. And then, of course, as you've all mentioned, once all of that data comes out, we'll be able to use all the techniques that I've talked about. So it will still be the scientific method. It will be just dramatically accelerated. And when I think it's about the very beginning of my career, I started as a research scientist at a laboratory in Germany. And I remember how excited we were in the lab when we got our very first computer, right? So this is just in one career, the lab was excited about getting their first computer and now all the things that you've been mentioning. So I think we're still going to be using the scientific method. We're not reinventing anything, but the first experiment most people are going to do is going to be an in silico experiment rather than in a flask.
Okay, interesting to note, right? So now, Greg, I kind of want to get it over to you now. In sort of like a conglomerate fashion, you've heard like various different perspectives where there's machine learning, data, methodologies, right? So let's talk about the impact, right? Where do you think the digital world will have like the biggest impact? Will it be internal operations or will it be external relationships with the markets? Thoughts?
Thanks. First of all, thanks everybody for being here, and I like to echo the fact some really, really bright people here, and it was really neat to meet many of the students out there. I've been the chemical industry now 30 years. And I'm the director of marketing and sales for Croda, a specialty chemical company. I'm not a scientist, so.
Same.
And I know that Google's really getting smart because I yelled at it, and she said, "I'm sorry if I've upset you." And that's true, right? So. For Croda, and this is where data, the rubber hits the road in sales and marketing. So my perspective is what I want to tell you about. Yes, we're going to do sales forecasting. We've got a very complex business, 800 products, 2,500 SKUs, thousands of customers buying thousands of products. Okay, you need forecasting data, big data. That's going to help us, okay? So that's an internal win. And the cloud, the data, being able to crunch that in real time quickly can save you so much time in asset turnaround, washouts, and just make the operation efficient. The other thing is, we're gonna be able to fail fast. You're gonna see a lot of these experiments, modeling, et cetera. You can avoid animal testing on new chemistries and understand how it can impact the environment because these models exist and they're very complex. So we can have a good idea that this chemistry or that chemistry will or won't do well in the environment for human health or biodegradability before we've even made it. And that's wonderful opportunity. So we're gonna fail fast, and that'll get us to newer products faster that are friendly for the environment, friendly for use, and effective for the consumers. But where I see the big change, what's really disruptive is in the sales and marketing area. And today, all y'all are really, really good with this thing, right? You can order sweatshirts and hats and Uber and everything in the world can be at your doorstep, right? Food. And in B2B, that's where it's going. I'm 30 years in the business, 52 years old, and they gave me the digital project. I can't even download an app. I have to have my. But it's because it's going to change the way we sell and market. Okay, when you guys are out doing a project, and you think I'm going to go ahead and look at some chemistry, where's the first place you go? You go to your computer, and you go to Google or Wiki or something, and you start reading about the topic, right? Our customers, as they start to fight their problem, come up with their solution, their new product that's gonna go out on the shelf, they start to think and go right to their computer and start looking and educating themselves. So if a Croda or a Merck or other companies aren't gonna meet them there in the digital space, then they're gonna either get the wrong information or definitely not my information, and their likelihood of me selling them something is very low now. So we have to be able to meet those creative scientists, formulators, customers, purchasing people, logistics people out on the web with great information, great collateral, so that they can start to answer their questions. And that's gonna change the way we sell. Chances of seeing a 52-year-old guy in a tie show up and make a sales call and solve your problem are gonna be fewer and farther between, but you can get online and hit a chat box and be talking to a PhD chemist that sits in the office next to me today and get an answer for how can I formulate something differently and better. That's how we're gonna change the B2B marketplace, and that's gonna be the big external change. The internal stuff is real, it's money, it's efficiency, and we're gonna make us a better company. But making us better sellers, providing better solutions faster for customers, that's gonna be out there on the web where we meet you guys.
That's a very good point, because now I'm starting to think, I don't know if you guys send emails on Google. Sometimes when you get an email, you respond back and it already has it typed out for you as to what you want to say. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Enter. Like, you know, so thanks, Amir. So given that information as to what Greg mentioned, that type of machine learning, that impact, both internally, externally, I kind of want to get this to more so like Jason and Amir here. So that, Jason, for example, your experience as to getting into the industry, getting into that computational science, your expectation back then as to what it will be now, has it lived up to that? And then Amir, when it comes to like cloud computing, what do you kind of foresee for the impact as what Greg mentioned? If you guys want to kind of like tag team that would be Awesome.
Sure. I mean, has it lived up to my expectations? I would say, after the first year at Philips, I spent 20 years being frustrated that I couldn't calculate the things I wanted to calculate. And that's what led me going into the data science group, in that they were looking for people to join, and my future boss basically came to me and said, "Could you bring a list of projects?" And so I brought the laundry list. It's everything I wanted to do in the last 20 years and wasn't able to do it, from the really simple to the patently absurd. And the funny thing is the patently absurd isn't very absurd anymore. And so it's kind of like you can do almost anything you need to do. We talk about, how can we make data better available for individuals so that they're not having to manually collect data. There's people in our industry that spend half their time just collecting data before they can make a decision, right? Well, the next advancement is, how do you take away the basic decisions that they don't need to make? Because a computer's really good at making basic decisions. You can use reinforcement learning to play games like Go and chess and those sorts of things now. Let's put in the hands the time that people can make creative decisions, can do things that require a human brain with the capabilities of the human brain that a computer cannot yet do today, and free them up from making rudimentary decisions. And I think that's where I see that you're really exciting where we're going and how it's living up to my expectations. It's almost exceeded my expectations from some standpoints, because 20 years ago, I didn't even anticipate that we would be able to hand off basic decisions to a computer in order to free up the time to do really, really value-added incremental decisions.
Yeah, so to pivot off of that point, right? I feel like the cloud is the place where you kind of put all of your data, right? Data by itself is kind of like crude oil. It's not very useful. It's like you can't really sell crude oil, right? You're not going to do a lot with it. Or maybe you can, but
$60 a barrel. $60 a barrel.
But it's not going to do you a lot of good if it's crude and it's in 60 different access databases, to your point, right? So the way you can really harness that data and start getting insights and automating decisions is you get it in one place. And that's what the cloud is really good for, right? Is taking all those disparate data sources, all those different systems, and getting that data in one place where you can massage it. You can extract the features that you actually want to build machine learning models around so that you can start deriving those insights that you want. And it's very much a science, right? Like, that's why it's called data science. It's not because it's like, programming and logical. You actually have to form a hypothesis. You have to test it. You have to figure out what machine learning model is actually going to give you the accuracy that you want to make those decisions that you need to make to automate your like day-to-day decisions that allow you to be more creative. So I think the cloud really allows companies to harness that data and then leverage it to really generate insights and kind of accelerate that innovation.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point now where the vast majority of the data scientists that work on their teams don't use an on-prem computer. I mean, they use one. They've got a laptop, but it's really more of a dumb terminal that's connecting to a computer that's got a lot of power that's on the cloud. Because all the data is on the cloud, all the computational capacity is on the cloud. You don't need it on-prem anymore. So we've got these huge on-prem pieces of equipment that just kind of sit idle because it's now more cost-effective, more higher capability to go to somebody like Google or Microsoft or AWS and get them to host all of that information, get them to host the computing capabilities, and make it accessible to everybody in the company.
Google does it the best, though.
So taking all that information from our data scientists and our geniuses between Jason and Amir, they know all the science. I kind of want to get the perspective from Greg, Shane, and Bob, taking that information from what you're hearing, right? How does that sound really for the impact, specifically for you guys' industries? Like how are we, without incriminating yourself, how are we impacting within our respective industries, essentially, given that information?
Sure.
Tech team.
This way? Okay, so, one of the things I think we need to remember is the products of the chemical industry. People don't know our products, they know how our products are used. So no one knows what polycarbonate is, but LED lighting is everywhere. And so we normally have to explain what we're doing for society through those applications. And digital is disrupting our end market. So just to give you a fun factoid, so a modern automobile is basically a product of the chemical industry. It's over 50% by volume is a chemicals, plastics and everything else. And there's a good $3,000 worth of chemicals in every single car. And there's been this symbiotic relationship between automobiles and the chemical industry ever since the big oil crisis. Now what's happening, future mobility, that's a digital-driven revolution, okay? Go to autonomous cars. Here's an interesting thing about autonomous cars. They don't crash. And if cars don't crash, they don't need to be repainted. And there's an entire industry that's called automotive refinish that's based on the fact that cars crash. And so there's going to be a lot of disruption. Yeah, interesting. The only reason we have not noticed this already is because of distracted driving. Were it not for distracted driving, we would see this in the data already. So I think we need to think not just about how it's affecting our industries, but our end customers and the end customers' end customers, and it's highly disruptive. And I know I worked at a chemical company and in startups for most of my career. Now I'm at Deloitte, and our clients are all thinking about this issue. What's going to be the disruption digitally to us, and then also our customers and our customers' customers. So that would be my perspective.
That's very nice. Jay, you want to take that too?
Yeah, sure. So I guess from my perspective, thinking about kind of disruption technology, it's machine learning. I talked a little bit about kind of in the intro about kind of the ability to do chemical synthesis differently, right? And I know there's a lot of chemists and chemical engineers in the area. I think one of the things that having the capabilities that you just described in order to kind of go out into the cloud and get the information that you need is really kind of impactful in the sense that you have access to chemical transformations that you would have never thought of, right? In a lot of cases, synthetic chemistry or chemical engineering as fields are kind of are based on the experiences that you have or the experience of the people you know. But being able to kind of pull from the data that's out there, whether it be, like you said, whether it be like the wikis or the Googles of the world, or just kind of scanning the literature, if you will, in terms of synthetic transformations. For us, though, one of the things that we think about is what's the quality of that data, right? So the actual data quality and data integrity. So yeah, the capability exists at Google to put, terabytes and terabytes of data, up into the cloud, et cetera. But what if that data is total garbage, right? Well, what if that data is not actually useful? Like a lot of it, I'm sure, a lot of the stuff on Google's and the AWS servers of the world is totally useless data. So how do we actually improve the information quality? How do we actually make sure the data that goes up there is the right data? If you actually write down in a lab notebook what the temperature you run your experiment at, is that the actual temperature that it was at, or is that just what you thought it was, right? So having data that is kind of, X reaction was executed at 55. If that was really 70, that the conclusions that are drawn or the data that's kind of pushed up into the data warehouses, if you will, it's kind of flawed in a way, right? So really kind of thinking about how do you actually make sure that the data has value and the data integrity is a part of that. I think is a complete undertone of how you actually drive value from the data that you're capturing. Undoubtedly, it's incredibly impactful, and you can get tons and tons of information, and you can actually search, search, or you can build process models, or you can use machine learning to drive decisions. But if the data at its core isn't of suitable integrity, it kind of diminishes the value there. So one of the things that we're really focused on is making sure that the data is correct, the data is what actually happened, and is a reflection on how you have there, or how you actually executed. So like having, pushing data that is really, that has the right level of data integrity is the key central tenet for us about how you make sure that the data is kind of impactful.
Nice.
It's about quality, not quantity.
Yeah, exactly. It's about quality, not quantity. Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So what I wanted to give you guys an experience just happened today, okay? It's month end, it's quarter end. I'm responsible for 2 businesses, P&Ls. But yet I'm still here in New York with you people having a great time, okay? And I was able to do all of my monthly reporting in about an hour, okay? This was days of spreadsheets, right? I call it thousands of hours and millions of lives were wasted. Having managers come see you and try and find out why is this overhead charge up, et cetera. It's all on click. It's dumped out of SAP into a data warehouse, and the business shows up in 4 graphs and 16 charts, and it's all done. And I can look, and I know exactly what I'm looking for. And so instead of me crunching spreadsheets and looking for the variances. They're all there. They're red when they're bad, and they're green when they're great. And there's red lights and stop lights and go lights, and it's all right there, intuitive, at my fingers. And in an hour, $100 million worth of business analyzed, reported, and done. And I can then go back to thinking. I can go back to problem solving. I can go back to like answering your questions. Like somebody just came to my live chat and asked me, hey, I need a rheology modifier that's got no foam and can stand up to high pH. Wow, that's kind of fun. It's a lot funner than crunching numbers. Okay, so that's that. The other part is I've got this fabulous amount of collateral. It sits in a place called our website. You guys probably reminds you of your college library. You know that information's in there, but there's no way you know where to get it. So we're working really hard on getting that great collateral data out into tools that people can use AI, taxonomy, and search functions and get those answers. What if you want an emulsifier with an HLB of 12 that has a Draves wetting time that you need and has a high foam or low foam and can stand up to high or low pH? Put those 5 things in there, and all of a sudden, out of our website, through this tool, comes 5 products. And you can say, wow, those are gonna answer some of my problems. Those can be ordered. Click samples, 48 hours, right? FedEx or UPS is at your lab door dropping those off for you to do your experiment with.
Amazon.
Really, really exciting times on the commercial and marketing side of this business, what we're gonna be able to do with this data.
Good convo, good convo. I kind of want to open it up to the floor. I want to see or hear any questions. So we only have roughly 10 minutes, so 2-3 questions. This guy, this champ right here.
Just for some counterpoint, I have one. I'm just curious, what your comments are about what's happening with the Boeing Aerospace Company recently and some of their airplanes and how that relates to automation and data and car crashes. Thank you. Just for counterpoint. But in all seriousness, I think it's worth commenting on. Thanks.
Okay. So who would like to take that question? I feel like anyone here on this panel is more than qualified to take that question. But I'll go with my friend right here.
So I'm not going to comment on Boeing, as you might expect, but let's talk about the, Deloitte is a very large consultancy, and but let's talk about the general problem, right? So I think, the question is, how much can we rely upon automation and how much can we not? And let's take an example from medicine, because it'll be a direct parallel to the Boeing situation. So a big problem in medicine and hospitals is sepsis. Patients, they suffer from sepsis. They're generally very sick, but also very stable. And then all of a sudden they go into septic shock, okay? And if they go into septic shock, the mortality rate is above 50%. The first generation of approaching that problem was to collect a lot of data and put it into the hospitals, right? And it failed. The reason it failed was because the sensitivity was not correct. It was either too sensitive and was setting up alarms like crazy, right? Or it was not sensitive enough and it wasn't showing anything. The next round of technologies, there's things that come out of Duke, are now being implemented because they put the human into the question, right? So it's the human plus the data. The human cannot absorb enough data to be able to see what's going on with septic shock, but they need to be there, ethnographically to be able to understand it. So I think, without commenting on the specific case, we're not going to replace the human side, and we get these lessons to remind us we need to combine data plus humans to solve the problems. So that's my answer without saying anything about Boeing.
Sweet. Got
So I guess I'll maybe before before Melody gets the mic, I'll make one other comment, right? So for me, automation is a big part of what we do in our area. Melody's too. I think that supervision becomes a pretty important part of automation, right? Because, a lot of times we're looking at automated lab reactors. We program a sequence of activities, we hit go, and you expect that it's going to do exactly what you wanted it to do, right? And I don't know any of the details about Boeing. I also won't speak towards that. But a lot of times what we experience is that while we wrote something in a particular sequence, it was either we programmed it incorrectly or some mechanical issue forced something different than what was anticipated, right? And in some cases, it could be as catastrophic as coat hangering a needle in a liquid handling system. In other cases, it could be not at all apparent that it added the wrong reagent at the wrong time and the wrong quantity to a reaction. And when you come back the next morning, instead of a complete reaction, you see black tarry goo. Like sometimes, like actually looking at, watching a robot when it's doing its thing and making sure it's making the motions, like actually supervising the automation becomes a pretty important part of what we do and how we think about leveraging automation. Without that, I think you do run the risk of actually having unexpected consequences or unintended consequences play out in ways that you didn't expect, and perhaps that's something that Boeing can probably experience. Right?
Yeah, you can. I think one of the key themes that you hear a lot, there's some really good books out there on the topic, is it's not about computers taking over and doing stuff for people and taking the people out of the decision-making process, right? It's the computer and the systems and machine learning and the AI working alongside with the person, augmenting the person's capability. So you don't want the machine to do everything, right? You want it to do certain things to free up the time for the person to do the things the computer can't do. You always want the ability for a human being to intervene in a creative way to solve a problem, because that's what they're really, really good at. I mean, we're exceptionally good at pattern recognition and creative problem solving. And you will always want to maintain that capability of people. That goes, the computer's a hammer, right? It's a tool. It's a really cool tool, right? But it is a tool. And don't think about it as, I'm going to take this tool and get rid of all the people. That's not the case at all, right? I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to allow these people to do much better things with their time than they were able to do before.
Yeah, it's not disruptive, right, Amir? It's not disruptive. Just a little bit.
Okay. Hi, thanks for a really informative panel discussion. So I had a question, I think in particular for Amir, but everybody who also has experience in this. So in the pharmaceutical industry, we have this kind of challenge, and I'm sure it's other industries experience it when we're thinking about data structure, right? So how do we capture data? So for example, what are our experimental parameters? How do we marry that with the analytical results? And how do we make that meaningful? For example, I'm a chemist. I want to say, who used this catalyst? What reactions was this catalyst used for? Seems like a really simple question, and we have electronic lab notebook. I should be able to search that. But when I do, everybody spelled it or written the name of the catalyst in a different way. They haven't recorded the CAS number, whatever. So I'm missing a lot of information. So it all comes down to the structure of the data and how it's captured. And I'm really intrigued by Google because, Google, in general, when you do a Google search, it's, searching free text. And I know a lot of pharmaceutical companies are going in the direction of ultra structuring their experimental data, and they're spending millions of dollars to do this just so they can search it later. Is this necessary? And I've always kind of had that question in my mind, do we really need to do this, or is there a good way to do free text searching of the way that a scientist records their data and get meaningful, mineable results out of that? Thanks.
Okay. So to kind of pivot off of Shane's point earlier, right? It's about the quality of the data, not the quantity of the data, right? So you have a lot of these data sets which have data that's crude and perhaps not exactly the way that you need it to be shaped so that you can actually search it, leverage it, use it in your future experiments, right? So it's true, there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are investing in technologies to homogenize this data and actually make it useful. It's the data process called ETL, extract, transform, and load. A lot of this crude data needs to be cleaned up, it needs to be massaged, it needs to be sort of streamlined in a way that can actually be indexed and then searched and then made useful. So I think that's where the industry is going. I think the companies that want to stay innovative in the space are making these investments so that they can leverage the data that they have and innovate faster.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I was gonna, I kind of have the same question in Melody though, right? And so, yes, I certainly agree with that. So one of the ways in which we've been thinking about this, or, in a couple of instances at Merck, is how do you actually not rely on a person to actually structure the data in the first place? So how do you actually use automation? How do you use, data stream integration? How do you use in situ analytics and Internet of Things type sensors, et cetera, to capture the data in the background so that it's already structured in the right way or it's already in a usable format? But a lot of it isn't, right? A lot of it is, what someone would typically, we do a lot of, our electronic lab notebooks, maybe like a lot of other chemistry organizations, are still paper on glass, right? It's trying to replicate the lab notebook of yesteryear in an electronic world. And how do you get that data? And I don't feel like we have a really good answer for that. To Melody's point and to accommodate what you're saying, I think the investments that we are making is ultra-structured data, right? It's really kind of mandating how the data is collected, what information is and isn't kind of brought along with a particular data package, just so we can find a way to navigate through that kind of quagmire. It's a challenge, though.
Right. So what you're looking for is more of a solution to automate that
Yeah.
process, that highly human process of structuring the data. And I think this is one of the really good applications for deep learning, right? And you take the metadata that's generated when you actually, take the crude data and you structure it, and, you do that n number of times, and you use that to train a deep learning model. And at a certain point, you can take that data pipeline and you can inject machine learning into it so that that process is automated. It takes a lot of data. It takes a lot of training for the machine learning model to be able to generate those capabilities. And it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, right? And it takes significant investment. But it is possible, and that's where we see a lot of the dividends that are coming out of those investments that companies are making.
So we got time for one more question. Two more questions. Three? No, two? Just two. Two more questions? Anyone?
So my question kind
Oh,
of
this guy.
surrounds the idea of product development and the idea of how are we ensuring that data isn't overlooking possible solutions and or saying that possible solutions are the answer. For example, in my laboratory, there's been cases where theoretical, say chemistry, doesn't quite match up to real world expectations. And so how are we using analytics to ensure that that information is validated and or isn't overlooking possible answers?
I kind of want to give that one to Greg, and then have Jason comment on that one too.
Sure. So we mentioned that there's a lot of modeling that we utilize to maybe help us fail fast, if you will, or succeed better in product development. And one of the things that you can't remove from the equation is the human and the intuition. And the thing that we find in science, and I think this is something you guys will all smile about, is that there is a thing as such as synergy. And so if you have a hunch and it doesn't play out in the model, you have to have the freedom as an individual, as a person, as a human, because that's where the magic is made oftentimes. You find the synergy. So I would say we can fail fast, we can get the easy things out, take those away, but if you have a gut feel, if you have a hunch, if you have an old wives' tale and you want to try it and you find the synergy, that's where the magic happens, right? So I was scientists, and as I say the softer side, the sales and marketing side, I would say data's great, but never give up on the human side, because I think that's where the real magic happens.
And I think one of the ways that we try to avoid that is in the way that we develop data science tools, in that you do it with an integrated team of individuals that have a diverse skill set, so that you don't want a mathematician just solving a problem, because the they're fantastic at the mathematics, but they may not understand the system that they're dealing with. You don't want a business person that doesn't understand the math solving the problem either, because they won't come up with a very creative solution to solve the problem. If you can get really talented, creative people together, and I mean, even better, they're so hard to find out. If you can find people that have those skill sets in and of themselves. That the highly technical mathematical person that has the business understanding, it's really, really powerful in order to get those people. But those are the people that are in the highest demand right now. It's the people that can solve a problem, can think through the conceptual understanding of why the problem should be solved a certain way, and then use the math to make an analytical solution. I think about what I'm doing right now. We do a lot of value chain related work. And you start looking at demand forecasts, and you may get something. You can throw any data you want at a forecast, and you see correlations all the time. A great example: I had a class, and they showed Berkshire Hathaway stock would bump every time Anne Hathaway had a successful movie. You're right, and you're like, wait a minute. And the reason why is because a whole bunch of hedge funds were doing natural language processing, looking at for Hathaway in the news, and when it increased a whole bunch, they'd go buy a bunch of stock, right? Didn't make any sense whatsoever, right? So can you be creative and use your thought process to say, yeah, I should probably throw that data out, right? I shouldn't be correlating Anne Hathaway's success with Berkshire Hathaway's stock price. So you have to be thoughtful and pragmatic about what you do. You just can't throw in an analytic tool at a solution and expect it to be robust and expect it to last. We've seen that a number of times with extraordinarily technically capable data scientists. They build these fantastic tools, a year and a half later, they totally crater because what they were predicting off of weren't variables that they were just correlated to the result. But they weren't. There was no cause and effect relationship. It's really important to make sure that you use your brain along with the tools.
So we got time for one last question. I gotta go with the guy back there. Wait, ooh, never mind. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
My microphone.
Who has the?
I'll let you decide, Cicely.
Okay.
Hello. So, quick question. The FDA today actually introduced a term, good machine learning practices. I'm sure many of us are familiar with GMPs, or good manufacturing practices. I'm just curious about what do you guys think our regulators could do to keep up with AI and machine learning in a life science context?
Sounds like your area, not mine.
Go for it.
So, I think of, so obviously more familiar with the GMP context, right? And if I think about what GMP, so good manufacturing process or practices, are really intended to set a collection of standards for how, what these set of expectations are about how you actually manufacture products in a way that's compliant and consistent, et cetera, right? So I do actually appreciate that there could be a set of standards or a common language that could be established between people doing data sciences or between people looking at machine learning, not just how you actually execute the activities in order to build the data sets or to leverage the algorithms that are out there, but also how you use that data, right? So I can understand why there's a desire or necessity for a regulatory agency to at least ask for some visibility into how decisions are being made and how machine learning algorithms are being leveraged to impact the manufacturing processes or the distribution and supply chain networks that we have, and ultimately how the medicines that we make get to the patient and how decision making is happening. I mean, we kind of talked about it a couple of questions ago. Like how do you actually avoid, how do you avoid with the Boeing question is how do you make sure that technology doesn't have unintended consequences? I think having a set of standards or having a set of kind of guiding principles that helps steer people in the right direction, I think is a worthy and a notable endeavor. I personally can't speak to good manufacturing or good machine learning practices, but I'm not fundamentally opposed with the concept. I think it certainly sounds it aligns to a lot of the values that GMP or GLP type activities would imply.
So to supplement your point, a really hot button issue with machine learning and regulation these days is the explainability of the models that are used to generate those insights. Or, when you're formulating new compounds and you get into the material sciences or pharmaceuticals, a lot of these deep learning models are using what's called unsupervised learning. And there can be a lot of crazy stuff happening underneath the hood that when you actually get in front of a regulatory agency, they're going to ask you to explain how your machine learning model works. How did it reach that decision or insight that you use to formulate X, right? So I think it's really important for companies as they explore these technologies to keep in mind that, you know, they are going to be held accountable to explaining how these algorithms and machine learning models actually work. So I think that sort of touches on it, but yeah.
All right, cool. I think that's it. Let's give it up for the panelists. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Turn it over to my friend Anthony.
Let's thank Jarrell and our panelists tonight again. They're clearly very passionate about this topic. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. It was actually quite insightful. And I'm going to introduce the chair of this event, Cicely Shillingford, who is an NYU PhD student in chemistry. And she's going to explain to you a little bit of what's upcoming. Okay? Cicely, please.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, everyone, for the discussion. I won't take up too much more of your time, but I would be remiss if I did not recognize the wonderful organizing committee, who are a group of students from all over the city that have donated their time over the past few months to put together this evening. So I ask everyone on the committee to please stand and be recognized for your efforts. Okay, they're all back there by the door. If you look on the back of your brochure, you will see their faces. If you see them out here tonight, please congratulate them. It's been really fun working on this with you guys, and I cannot wait to see how this event evolves in the future. For those of you, I know there's a few who have been here since the first event. When I walked in, I ran into an old colleague, and she looked at me and was like, this is a lot different than the first bonding conference. And really, it's been a really exciting growth, and I hope that you'll stick with us as we continue to add more programming to this wonderful event. If you look inside of your brochures, you will see an insert, and that insert contains the names of all of the students who are presenting here tonight. The rest of the evening is really about these students. It is about these wonderful leaders who will be the future of digital innovation and the future of the chemical industry and beyond. So please interact with them. You all have a set of 3 gold stickers. You can take that sticker and put it on the back of the posters you find the most compelling, or on the back of the posters belonging to the students you find the most engaging, whatever you choose. At 9:15, the committee will be tallying up those stickers, so please have your votes in by then. And at 9:30, we will announce an award for the best poster. So this is your time to get to know them before 9:15. Don't forget the deadline, and that's it for this portion of the evening. So please enjoy yourself. The bar is open. Have a good night.